The people who call you worthless today may someday be forced to stand and applaud your name, but only if you refuse to let their voices become your future. My name is Mason Carter, and for most of my life, I believe that earning my parents' approval was the greatest achievement I could ever reach. Looking back now, I realize I spent years chasing something that was never mine to control. My parents had already decided who their successful son would be long before either of us became adults. My older brother, Tyler, had always been the center of every celebration, every family conversation, and every expectation. If Tyler received an average grade, my father proudly called him hardworking. If I earned the highest score in my class, my mother would simply ask why I had not joined more extracurricular activities. Nothing I accomplished ever seemed enough because someone else had already been chosen as the family's future. That realization did not happen all at once. It came through hundreds of small moments that quietly taught me where I stood inside my own home. The evening everything truly changed began with what looked like another ordinary family dinner. My parents had invited several relatives to celebrate Tyler receiving a management position at a regional sales company. The dining room was filled with laughter, homemade food, and endless praise for my brother. My father stood near the head of the table with a glass of iced tea raised proudly in the air. He smiled as he described Tyler as the son who would carry the Carter family name forward. My mother nodded beside him, telling everyone that Tyler had always known how to succeed because he understood real life. I quietly helped carry serving dishes into the kitchen while listening to every compliment floating through the house. Nobody asked about my final semester at the university. Nobody wondered how my research project was progressing. Nobody even remembered that my graduation ceremony was only a few days away. I had learned not to expect those questions anymore. After everyone sat down, one of my uncles smiled politely and asked how school was going. Before I could answer, my father laughed softly and waved his hand dismissively. He said Mason was still chasing dreams instead of preparing for a real career. A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. My mother looked directly at me and sighed. She said she loved me because I was her son, but someone had to tell me the truth before life became even harder. Then she spoke the sentence that stayed with me for years. She said, "Sometimes you have to accept that not everyone is meant to accomplish something important." The room became very quiet. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. I looked around the table, hoping someone would change the subject. Yet every face remained still. My father leaned back confidently before adding another sentence that hurt even more. He looked directly into my eyes and said, "You are wasting your potential because you keep pretending you are smarter than you really are. Stop chasing impossible dreams. Right now, you are simply worthless to your own future." The word echoed inside my mind long after the conversation moved on. Worthless. I had heard criticism before. I had been compared to Tyler more times than I could count, but hearing my own father describe me that way in front of the entire family felt different. Surprisingly, I did not argue. Years earlier, I would have defended myself. I would have explained my grades, my research, my scholarships, and the long nights I spent studying inside the engineering building until security officers reminded everyone that the campus was closing. None of those explanations had ever changed anyone's opinion. That evening, I simply lowered my eyes and continued eating in silence. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated quietly inside my pocket. I glanced at the screen beneath the table. The message came from the office of the university president. My heartbeat immediately quickened. The email subject line read, "Confidential attendance required." I carefully opened the message without drawing attention. It informed me that I had been selected to attend a private rehearsal before graduation and that I was not permitted to discuss the invitation with anyone until the official ceremony concluded. The email ended by asking me to arrive at the administration building by 8 o'clock on Friday morning. I read the message twice before locking my phone again. Nobody at the table noticed. My father continued speaking proudly about Tyler's promotion, while relatives congratulated him one after another. My mother smiled as if everything in her world had unfolded exactly as she expected. I quietly realized something in that moment. For the first time in my life, I no longer wanted their approval before believing in myself. I finished dinner, helped wash the dishes without being asked, thanked everyone for the meal, and walked outside into the cool evening air. My old sedan waited in the driveway beneath the porch light. As I opened the driver's door, I heard my father call after me from the front steps. He told me not to stay up too late reading books that would never pay my bills. I smiled politely, wished everyone a good night, and climbed into the driver's seat. As I pulled away from the house, the glow of the family gathering slowly disappeared in my rearview mirror. The confidential email remained fresh in my mind, and although I still had no idea why the university president wanted me there, something deep inside me whispered that the morning waiting ahead would become the beginning of a completely different chapter of my life. The next morning my alarm rang at 5:30, long before the sun had fully risen above the rooftops outside my apartment. I had developed the habit years earlier because every hour mattered when every dollar mattered. My apartment was barely 500 square feet, with faded beige walls, a tiny kitchen, and furniture that came from thrift stores and community donation centers. There was nothing impressive about the place, yet every corner reminded me that I had earned it myself. I brewed a small pot of coffee, packed a peanut butter sandwich for lunch, and reviewed the list of assignments waiting for me that day. My schedule had become almost mechanical. Morning classes, afternoon research, evening shift at the campus library, late-night study sessions, then a few hours of sleep before doing it all again. It was exhausting, but it was also the only path I could afford. Unlike many of my classmates, I did not have parents paying tuition or covering rent. Every semester required careful planning, scholarships, and income from several part-time jobs. During my freshman year, I had worked at a grocery store stocking shelves. Sophomore year, I cleaned classrooms before sunrise. By junior year, I had become a student assistant in the engineering department while continuing evening shifts at the library. None of those jobs were glamorous, but every paycheck represented another week that I could stay in school. Whenever I looked at my bank account, I saw numbers that demanded discipline instead of comfort. Meanwhile, my family believed I spent my time wandering around campus without direction. They never asked how tuition was paid. They never asked where the money came from for textbooks, lab fees, or groceries. Somehow they simply assumed that because I was not already earning a large salary, I was drifting through life without purpose. At first their assumptions hurt. Eventually, they became background noise that faded behind the sound of my own determination. By the beginning of senior year, something unexpected happened. One of my professors, Dr. Hannah Reynolds, stopped me after class and asked if I had considered joining a university research initiative involving artificial intelligence and disaster response logistics. I admitted that I had never imagined someone like me would qualify. She smiled and told me qualifications were measured by effort and results, not by confidence. That conversation changed everything. The project demanded long hours beyond my normal workload, but it also introduced me to graduate students, faculty mentors, and industry partners who challenged me to think beyond the classroom. While many students hurried home after lectures, I often remained inside the engineering building until nearly midnight refining algorithms, testing simulations, and correcting mistakes that sometimes took days to understand. There were evenings when frustration nearly convinced me to quit. I would stare at lines of code that refused to cooperate while wondering whether my father had been right about me all along. Then I would remember the feeling of hearing the word worthless spoken across the family dinner table, and instead of walking away, I would keep working another hour. Slowly, those extra hours began producing results. Our research team won recognition at regional academic conferences. Faculty members started inviting me to assist with presentations. Graduate students treated me as an equal even though I was still an undergraduate. None of those moments appeared on social media because I rarely posted anything about my life. I preferred letting the work speak for itself. Besides, there was nobody at home who seemed interested in hearing those stories anyway. During Thanksgiving break, I returned home for one afternoon because my mother insisted that family traditions still mattered. The conversation followed a familiar pattern. Tyler talked about company meetings, future promotions, and plans to purchase a larger vehicle. My father listened proudly while asking detailed questions about every aspect of his career. When someone finally asked me how college was going, I mentioned that our research team had recently received national attention from several academic organizations. Before I could explain further, my father interrupted with a polite smile that barely concealed his skepticism. He said academic awards were nice, but they did not always translate into success in the real world. My mother nodded and reminded me that impressive-sounding projects did not necessarily pay the mortgage. I quietly smiled and changed the subject. There was no point arguing because experience had already taught me that facts alone could not overcome expectations people refused to question. Back on campus, the semester accelerated. Dr. Reynolds introduced me to members of the university leadership during several research demonstrations. I noticed that administrators asked surprisingly detailed questions about my background, my academic goals, and the obstacles I had overcome. I assumed they simply enjoyed meeting students involved in successful projects. I never imagined those conversations were leading somewhere much larger. One chilly afternoon in early spring, Dr. Reynolds asked me to stop by her office after our weekly meeting. She closed the door, congratulated me on another successful presentation, and handed me a sealed envelope marked confidential. Inside was an official notification stating that I had been nominated for the university's highest student distinction, an honor recognizing scholarship, leadership, service, and resilience across every academic college. My hands trembled as I read the letter. The nomination itself felt impossible. Dr. Reynolds gently reminded me that the selection committee required complete confidentiality until graduation because finalists were not permitted to discuss the process publicly. I promised I would respect those instructions. Walking back across campus beneath rows of blooming trees, I felt equal parts excitement and disbelief. For years, I had quietly carried responsibilities that almost nobody outside the university knew existed. Now complete strangers believed I had accomplished something meaningful, while the people closest to me still assumed I was falling behind. I slipped the envelope into my backpack beside worn notebooks and library receipts before heading to my evening shift. As students checked out textbooks and prepared for final examinations, I organized shelves with the same quiet focus that had carried me through every difficult year, never imagining just how dramatically the coming graduation ceremony would change the story my family believed they already understood. The weeks leading up to graduation became the busiest season of my entire college experience, yet they also became the quietest chapter of my life. Every morning, I walked across campus carrying the same worn backpack, attended the same lectures, completed the same research meetings, and reported to the library for my evening shift. From the outside, nothing about my routine suggested that anything extraordinary was happening. That was exactly how the university wanted it. The selection committee had emphasized that every finalist must keep the process completely confidential until the official ceremony. Even professors who supported my nomination rarely mentioned it in public. If we crossed paths in a hallway, they simply smiled or wished me luck before continuing on their way. Their discretion made the entire experience feel almost unreal, as though I were living two completely different lives at the same time. One existed inside the university, where faculty members trusted me with important responsibilities and encouraged me to pursue opportunities one had never imagined possible. The other existed outside campus, where my own family still believed I was struggling to find direction. I often wondered how two groups of people could look at the same person and see completely different futures. One afternoon, I was invited to attend a luncheon with several university trustees, research sponsors, and student leaders. I assumed I had been asked to represent the engineering department because of our recent academic project. During the event, I answered questions about our research, my educational goals, and the challenges of balancing school with multiple jobs. The conversations felt genuine. Nobody asked where my family worked or whether I came from wealth. They cared about ideas, perseverance, and character. As the luncheon ended, Dr. Hannah Reynolds quietly introduced me to the university president, Dr. Eleanor Whitmore. She greeted me with a warm handshake and thanked me for the contributions I had made to both the campus and the surrounding community. I was surprised that she already knew details about my volunteer tutoring program for local high school students. I had started the program almost 2 years earlier because I remembered how overwhelming advanced mathematics had felt when I was younger. Every Saturday morning, I spent several hours helping students prepare for college entrance exams. I had never considered it extraordinary. To me, it simply felt like giving someone else the encouragement I had once needed myself. Dr. Whitmore smiled and told me that universities measured success by much more than grades alone. Her words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. A few days later, I received another confidential email asking me to attend a rehearsal inside the university auditorium before graduation weekend. The instructions remained simple. Arrive early. Follow staff directions. Do not discuss the schedule with anyone. Even then, I still did not know whether I would actually receive the honor or simply participate in the ceremony. The uncertainty filled every day with quiet anticipation. Meanwhile, life beyond campus continued exactly as it always had. My mother called one evening while I was finishing paperwork at the library. She reminded me that the family planned to gather the night before graduation because Tyler wanted to share exciting news about another career opportunity. She never asked whether I had anything important happening that weekend besides receiving my diploma. I politely agreed to attend because I still hoped that someday our conversations might become different. When I arrived at my parents' house the following evening, familiar voices echoed through the living room. Relatives laughed together while photographs of Tyler's accomplishments decorated the fireplace mantel. My mother proudly pointed toward a framed newspaper clipping featuring Tyler from several years earlier. She told everyone that determination always revealed itself early in life. I quietly looked around the room without saying anything. There were no photographs from my university years anywhere in the house. No graduation announcements rested on the coffee table. No one mentioned that I had completed one of the most demanding engineering programs in the state while supporting myself financially. During dinner, my aunt smiled kindly and asked whether I had found a job after graduation. Before I could answer, my father leaned back in his chair with complete confidence. He said he hoped I would finally become realistic instead of chasing dreams that rarely worked out. Then he turned toward Tyler and began discussing salaries, promotions, and retirement plans. Everyone listened with admiration. I listened too, although my attention drifted toward the confidential envelope folded carefully inside my jacket pocket. The official ceremony schedule had arrived earlier that afternoon. My name appeared on a page marked special recognition, but no additional explanation accompanied it. I folded the paper before anyone noticed and slipped it back into my pocket. My mother eventually looked across the table and asked whether I was nervous about graduating. I smiled honestly and admitted that I was excited. She laughed softly and said excitement was understandable because real life would finally begin once school ended. My father nodded before offering one final piece of advice. He said that success belonged to people who accepted reality instead of expecting recognition. I thanked him for the advice without revealing what I already knew. There was no satisfaction in proving someone wrong through an argument. If anything meaningful happened the next morning, it would happen because of years of quiet work rather than a single conversation around a dinner table. After dessert, I helped clear the dishes and thanked my parents for inviting me. As I reached the front door, Tyler followed me outside. For a moment, we stood together beneath the porch light without speaking. Finally, he admitted that he respected how hard I had worked to finish college. It was not an apology, but it was the first sincere compliment I could remember hearing from him in years. I smiled, wished him well with his own career, and drove back to my apartment beneath a sky filled with bright spring stars. Once inside, I carefully laid out my graduation gown, polished my shoes, and placed the confidential schedule beside my alarm clock. Sleep came slowly that night. I was not thinking about awards or applause. I was thinking about every early morning, every overnight shift, every empty bank account, every meal skipped to save money, every assignment completed while exhausted, and every moment someone had quietly decided that I would never become anything remarkable. By sunrise, all of those years would finally stand together in one place, waiting for the world to see what perseverance looked like when nobody had been watching. Graduation morning arrived with clear blue skies and the kind of crisp spring air that made the entire campus feel alive. I parked my old sedan in the same student lot where I had left it hundreds of times before and sat quietly for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The university buildings glowed beneath the early sunlight, and groups of graduates wearing black gowns hurried across the sidewalks carrying cameras, flowers, and coffee cups. Parents embraced their children, younger siblings laughed while taking photographs, and professors greeted students with genuine excitement. It was a celebration years in the making. I took a slow breath, picked up my graduation cap, and walked toward the administration building for the confidential rehearsal listed in my schedule. A university staff member checked my name, smiled warmly, and directed me through a side entrance that most graduates never used. Inside, several administrators and ceremony coordinators reviewed the order of events with remarkable attention to detail. Every movement on stage had already been planned. Every announcement had been rehearsed. When my name appeared on the large monitor during the presentation, I noticed a short pause before the next slide appeared. The coordinator simply smiled and reminded everyone involved that certain portions of the ceremony would remain confidential until the official presentation. No one explained further, and I respected the silence. After rehearsal ended, Dr. Hannah Reynolds found me near the hallway outside the auditorium. She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and told me that regardless of what happened later that day, she hoped I understood how proud the faculty had become of the person I had grown into. I thanked her sincerely because her belief in me had changed the direction of my life long before any recognition ever appeared. She smiled once more before walking away to greet another student. Her confidence somehow made me feel calmer. By late morning, the campus had transformed into a sea of graduates and families filling every pathway. Folding chairs stretched across the athletic arena where thousands of guests slowly found their seats beneath colorful university banners. Volunteers welcomed visitors while the university orchestra quietly rehearsed near the stage. I stood with my graduating class behind the entrance tunnel waiting for the procession to begin. Around me, classmates laughed nervously, adjusted graduation caps, and shared plans for graduate school, new careers, and summer vacations. Some introduced their parents to favorite professors. Others hugged lifelong friends before the ceremony officially started. I smiled as I listened to their conversations, grateful simply to have reached this day. A few minutes later, I spotted my own family entering the arena from across the field. My father, Richard, walked confidently beside my mother, Linda, while Tyler followed carrying a small camera. They looked around searching for my seat among the graduates. Although they had rarely shown interest in my university life, they had still chosen to attend my graduation, and for that I was genuinely thankful. As the opening music began, faculty members in colorful academic regalia led the procession toward the stage. The audience stood respectfully while hundreds of graduates followed in orderly lines. I found my assigned seat near the front section because engineering students had been arranged alphabetically. From where I sat, I could clearly see my parents several rows back. My mother smiled politely and waved when our eyes met. I waved back before the ceremony officially began. The university president, Dr. Eleanor Whitmore, welcomed everyone with a speech about perseverance, curiosity, and service. She spoke about students who had overcome financial hardship, personal challenges, and unexpected obstacles while continuing to pursue education with integrity. As she spoke, I felt as though every sentence reflected countless moments from my own journey, yet I reminded myself that many graduates carried stories just as meaningful. The presentation of degrees began college by college. Names were announced one after another while families applauded enthusiastically. The atmosphere remained joyful and relaxed. Eventually, the engineering graduates were called to line up near the stage. I adjusted my gown, straightened my cap, and joined the line. Each student stepped forward, shook hands, accepted a diploma cover, smiled for a photograph, and returned to a seat. When my turn came, I crossed the stage exactly as expected. Dr. Whitmore smiled warmly as she handed me the diploma cover and quietly whispered, "Please remain nearby after this section concludes." Her words lasted only a few seconds, but they confirmed that the confidential instructions had not been forgotten. I nodded respectfully before continuing exactly as directed. After every graduate had received a diploma, the audience expected the ceremony to conclude with the traditional closing remarks. Instead, the Master of Ceremonies returned to the podium and announced that before the final benediction, the university wished to present one final distinction. A gentle wave of curiosity moved through the audience as people settled back into their seats. The announcer explained that each year the university recognized one graduating senior whose academic excellence, leadership, resilience, and service represented the highest ideals of the institution. The award had been presented only a handful of times over the past several decades because the standards remained extraordinarily high. My heart began beating faster as I quietly stood where I had been instructed to wait behind the stage curtain. Through a narrow opening, I could see my parents listening with polite interest, completely unaware that the next few minutes would challenge everything they believed they knew about my college experience. The announcer continued describing the recipient without revealing a name, speaking about years of balancing demanding coursework with multiple jobs, leading meaningful research, mentoring younger students, and serving the community without seeking recognition. I noticed Tyler slowly turn toward my parents with a puzzled expression, as though pieces of the description sounded strangely familiar. My father folded his arms thoughtfully, while my mother leaned forward, listening more carefully with each sentence. Behind the curtain, I closed my eyes for one brief moment, took a steady breath, and prepared to walk onto the stage for the moment that would forever separate the life my family had imagined for me from the life I had quietly built one determined day at a time. The arena became completely silent as the master of ceremonies paused for a moment before reading the final lines of the introduction. Every graduate remained seated. Every family waited with quiet anticipation. I stood behind the stage curtain, hearing nothing except my own heartbeat. The announcer smiled toward the audience and said that the recipient of the university's highest student distinction had demonstrated extraordinary academic excellence, while maintaining one of the most demanding work schedules ever documented by the Student Affairs Office. The recipient had contributed to nationally recognized engineering research, mentored dozens of local high school students without compensation, and inspired faculty members through unwavering perseverance and humility. Then came the words that changed everything. Please join me in congratulating this year's recipient of the President's Distinguished Scholar Medal, Mr. Mason Carter. For a fraction of a second, the entire arena remained frozen, as though thousands of people were processing the name together. Then the applause erupted. It began with the faculty seated behind the stage, spread through the graduating class, and within moments the entire audience was standing. The sound echoed through the arena with an energy I had never experienced before. I stepped onto the stage, trying to remain composed even as my emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore greeted me with a warm smile before inviting me to stand beside her at center stage. She waited until the applause softened before speaking again. She explained that the President's Distinguished Scholar Medal recognized one graduating senior whose achievements reflected exceptional scholarship, leadership, integrity, resilience, and service to both the university and the surrounding community. She continued by describing how I had completed one of the university's most rigorous engineering programs while supporting myself through multiple part-time jobs every semester. Large screens beside the stage displayed photographs from research laboratories, tutoring sessions, engineering presentations, and community outreach events that I had never expected anyone outside the university to see. The audience watched images of me teaching mathematics to high school students on Saturday mornings, assisting professors with engineering demonstrations, and working late inside campus laboratories. Dr. Whitmore described the disaster response research project that had earned recognition from academic organizations across the country and explained that several faculty members had independently nominated me for this honor because they believed my quiet determination represented the very best of the university's values. She also shared that despite carrying an extraordinary workload, I had consistently volunteered my time to help younger students succeed, often remaining after long work shifts simply because someone needed encouragement. As she spoke, I glanced toward the audience and finally found my family. My father's confident expression had completely disappeared. Richard Carter sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the stage without blinking. My mother covered her mouth with both hands as tears slowly filled her eyes. Tyler stared at the giant screens, showing photographs from years of work that none of them had ever known existed. He looked from the screen back to me several times, struggling to understand how so much of my life had unfolded without any of us speaking about it. Dr. Whitmore gently placed the gold medal around my neck before presenting a beautifully engraved plaque. She shook my hand firmly and quietly said, "Congratulations. You have earned every moment of this day." The audience rose once again for another standing ovation. Looking across the arena, I realized that complete strangers were celebrating accomplishments my own family had never taken the time to discover. Yet instead of feeling angry, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The applause was meaningful, but it was not what moved me most. What truly mattered was knowing that every early morning, every overnight library shift, every difficult exam, every missed social event, every financial sacrifice, and every moment of self-doubt had quietly built a life that no opinion could erase. When the applause settled, Dr. Whitmore invited me to address the graduating class with a few remarks. I stepped toward the podium, took a slow breath, and looked across thousands of faces. I thanked my professors, classmates, mentors, university staff, and everyone who had believed in students whose potential was not always obvious at first glance. Then I shared something deeply personal. I said that many people spend years waiting for someone else to tell them they are capable, worthy, or intelligent enough to chase their dreams. I admitted that I had spent much of my own life searching for that kind of approval. But eventually I discovered that confidence grows through daily choices rather than public praise. I encouraged every graduate to continue working with integrity even when nobody seemed to notice, because character developed most powerfully during the seasons when recognition had not yet arrived. The arena responded with warm applause, but I noticed something far more meaningful. My father slowly stood with the rest of the audience. His hands came together almost hesitantly at first before he joined the standing ovation surrounding him. My mother remained standing beside him, tears still running down her face as she applauded. Tyler clapped with genuine pride while never taking his eyes off the stage. For the first time in my life, I did not see disappointment reflected in their expressions. I saw surprise, humility, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. As the ceremony concluded and graduates tossed their caps into the bright afternoon sky, hundreds of families rushed onto the field embracing one another and celebrating years of hard work. I remained near the stage for several minutes speaking with faculty members, donors, and fellow graduates who offered congratulations. In the distance, I noticed my family slowly making their way through the crowd toward me. Their pace was unhurried, almost uncertain, as though they no longer knew exactly what words belonged between us after everything they had just witnessed. I stood quietly where I was, the medal resting against my graduation gown, waiting not for an apology or an explanation, but simply for the truth that all of us would finally have to face together. As the celebration slowly settled into hundreds of smaller conversations across the field, I remained near the stage greeting professors, classmates, and university staff who had shaped the last 4 years of my life. One after another, faculty members introduced me to alumni, research sponsors, and community leaders who thanked me for my work and wished me success in the future. Every conversation felt genuine. Nobody spoke about luck. Nobody suggested that my accomplishments had appeared overnight. They spoke about consistency, discipline, and character. Hearing those words from people who had watched my journey unfold meant more than I could express. After several minutes, I noticed my family standing only a few yards away. They were not speaking to one another. They simply waited quietly, almost uncertain whether they belonged in this moment. I excused myself from the group I was speaking with and walked toward them with a calm smile. For the first time in years, none of us seemed to know how to begin the conversation. My mother was the first to step forward. Tears still filled her eyes as she gently touched the medal hanging around my neck. She looked at it for several seconds before looking back at me. Her voice trembled as she quietly asked, "When did all of this happen?" I smiled gently and answered honestly, "It happened one ordinary day at a time." She lowered her eyes, as though that simple answer carried more weight than any speech I could have given. My father remained silent for another moment before extending his hand toward me. I shook it instinctively, but instead of letting go, he pulled me into a brief embrace. It was not dramatic. It was awkward, unfamiliar, and completely sincere. When he stepped back, his eyes reflected a humility I had never seen before. He admitted that everything he believed about my college years had been completely wrong. He said he had assumed that if I was not constantly talking about success, then success was not happening. He confessed that he had mistaken quiet determination for a lack of ambition. Hearing those words did not erase the past, but they mattered because they came without excuses. Before I could respond, Dr. Hannah Reynolds approached our group carrying a folder of graduation materials. She greeted my parents warmly and introduced herself. My father immediately thanked her for everything she had done for me. Dr. Reynolds smiled politely before saying something that surprised all of us. She explained that while professors could teach technical knowledge, they could not teach the level of resilience I had demonstrated over 4 years. She described arriving on campus before sunrise many mornings and finding me already working before classes began. She mentioned evenings when the engineering building had nearly emptied while I remained inside finishing research before heading directly to my library shift. She spoke about weekends spent tutoring high school students even during examination season. My mother listened quietly with tears returning to her eyes. She softly admitted that she had never known any of those things. Dr. Reynolds looked at her kindly and replied that many students quietly carried burdens their families never fully understood. Before leaving, she congratulated all of us and wished my family well. Moments later, another familiar voice called my name. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore approached with several university trustees. She warmly congratulated me again before turning toward my parents. She told them they should be proud because their son had become one of the finest student leaders the university had ever recognized. She explained that the selection committee had reviewed hundreds of outstanding graduates and unanimously agreed that my combination of academic achievement, community service, leadership, and perseverance represented the highest standard the university hoped to encourage. Then she added something that left my family completely speechless. She explained that multiple faculty members had independently written letters describing not only my accomplishments, but also my humility, kindness, and willingness to help others succeed without expecting recognition. My father quietly thanked her while struggling to find the right words. After Dr. Whitmore departed to greet other graduates, the four of us began walking slowly across campus together. The sidewalks that had once witnessed countless lonely mornings now felt strangely different. Every few steps, someone stopped to congratulate me. Students waved. Professors smiled. Campus employees shook my hand. My parents watched every interaction in complete silence. Finally, Tyler looked around the campus and laughed softly, almost in disbelief. He admitted that he had never realized how many people knew me. He smiled before saying, "I thought I was the successful brother, but it looks like you built an entire life that none of us ever bothered to see." There was no jealousy in his voice, only honest admiration. I smiled back and told him that success was never a competition between brothers. It was simply the result of refusing to quit when life became difficult. As we reached the engineering building, I pointed toward one of the upper windows overlooking the courtyard. I explained that many nights the lights in that laboratory remained on until nearly midnight because our research team refused to leave until the work was finished. I showed them the library entrance where I had worked countless evening shifts before returning home to study. I pointed toward a bench beneath a large oak tree where I often ate inexpensive lunches while reviewing lecture notes, because buying meals on campus did not fit my budget. None of those places looked extraordinary, yet together they represented the real story behind the medal hanging around my neck. My mother quietly wiped away another tear before whispering that she wished she had asked more questions instead of making assumptions. I gently told her that the past could not be rewritten, but the future had not yet been written at all. We stood together in comfortable silence as graduates continued celebrating around us. And for the first time in many years, it felt as though we were no longer standing on opposite sides of the same story, but finally beginning to understand it together. Over the next several days, the excitement of graduation slowly faded, but the conversations that followed became far more important than the ceremony itself. After years of speaking only about careers, comparisons, and expectations, my family finally began asking questions they had never asked before. My father wanted to know how I had managed to pay tuition without asking for financial help. My mother wondered how I balanced engineering classes with multiple jobs. Tyler admitted that he had always assumed college had been relatively easy for me because I never complained. I answered every question honestly, not because I wanted sympathy, but because I believed the truth deserved to be heard. One Sunday afternoon, my parents invited me to their house for lunch. The invitation felt different from previous family gatherings. There was no celebration centered around Tyler. There was no long speech comparing one son to the other. When I arrived, my mother greeted me with a warm hug before leading me into the dining room. To my surprise, she had placed several framed photographs from my graduation ceremony on the mantel beside the family pictures that had always featured Tyler's accomplishments. It was a small gesture, yet it carried years of unspoken meaning. During lunch, the conversation remained relaxed. We talked about professors, research projects, future job opportunities, and memories from my childhood that none of us had discussed in a long time. For the first time, I felt as though my parents were listening because they genuinely wanted to understand rather than preparing to judge my answers. After we finished eating, my father asked if I would take a walk with him around the neighborhood. We had not done that since I was a teenager. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalks as we walked quietly between rows of maple trees. After several minutes of silence, he finally spoke. He admitted that when Tyler found success early in his career, he became so focused on celebrating one path that he stopped paying attention to every other possibility. He confessed that he had confused visible success with lasting character. Looking down at the sidewalk, he quietly said that the hardest part of graduation day was not realizing how accomplished I had become. The hardest part was realizing how little he had known about his own son. I listened without interrupting because I could hear genuine regret in every word. He apologized for every comparison, every dismissive comment, and every time he assumed I would fail before giving me the chance to succeed. When he mentioned the evening he had called me worthless in front of our relatives, his voice nearly broke. He admitted that he had replayed that moment in his mind over and over since graduation, wishing he could take those words back. I stopped walking and looked at him. I told him that those words had hurt more than he probably realized, but I also admitted something else. I said that carrying resentment forever would only allow the past to continue controlling both of us. Forgiveness did not mean pretending painful moments never happened. It meant choosing not to let them define the future. My father nodded slowly before thanking me for giving him a chance he believed he did not deserve. Later that evening, Tyler asked if we could meet for coffee. We found a small cafe near downtown where we had occasionally gone as children with our parents. Sitting across from me, he smiled awkwardly before admitting that he owed me an apology as well. He explained that growing up as the favored child had often felt comfortable, and because of that comfort he had failed to notice how differently our parents treated us. He confessed that whenever they praised him while criticizing me, he rarely questioned whether it was fair because he simply accepted the attention. As adults, that pattern quietly continued. He admitted that hearing the university president describe my years of sacrifice had forced him to confront something he had avoided for a long time. Success should never have been measured by comparison. It should have been measured by effort, integrity, and the impact a person leaves on others. I appreciated his honesty because he was not making excuses. He was accepting responsibility for his own part in the story. We spent nearly 2 hours talking about childhood memories, missed opportunities, and the lives we hoped to build moving forward. By the time we left the cafe, I no longer felt like the overlooked younger brother walking beside the family's favorite son. I simply felt like two brothers beginning a healthier relationship built on mutual respect instead of competition. Over the following weeks, our family slowly developed new traditions. Sunday dinners became conversations instead of comparisons. My parents asked about my research instead of assuming they already understood it. Tyler shared updates about his own career while encouraging me to discuss new engineering projects. We celebrated one another without keeping score. One afternoon, my mother quietly handed me a small cardboard box she had found while cleaning the attic. Inside were elementary school science fair ribbons, handwritten essays, and report cards that I had completely forgotten about. She smiled sadly and admitted that she had packed them away years earlier without realizing how meaningful they would someday become. Together we looked through every paper, laughing at childhood drawings and old photographs. She gently said that she wished she had recognized my determination much earlier because looking back, the signs had always been there. I smiled and told her that perhaps the most important thing was not when someone finally sees your value, but what they choose to do once they do. As summer approached, I realized that my greatest reward had never been the medal, the applause, or the recognition. Those moments lasted only a day. What truly endured was watching my family slowly replace assumptions with understanding, comparisons with encouragement, and old mistakes with genuine efforts to become better than we had been before. The months following graduation opened doors that I once believed existed only for other people. I accepted a position with a respected engineering and technology research organization that valued curiosity, teamwork, and continuous learning more than impressive titles. On my first day, I walked into a bright office filled with experienced engineers who treated every new employee with the same respect regardless of age or background. Nobody cared that I had driven an older sedan into the parking garage. Nobody asked whether my parents had supported my education. They cared about ideas, preparation, and the willingness to solve difficult problems together. It felt like stepping into a world where effort truly mattered. Even as my career began moving forward, I never forgot the students who reminded me so much of myself only a few years earlier. Every Saturday morning, I returned to the university campus to continue tutoring high school seniors preparing for college entrance examinations. Many of them came from families facing financial challenges, while others simply lacked someone who believed they could succeed. I recognized the uncertainty in their faces because I had carried it for years. Instead of beginning each session with formulas or equations, I always started with the same message. I told them that circumstances could influence their journey, but they did not have the final authority to define their future. Confidence was built through daily habits, not through waiting for perfect encouragement. Word about the tutoring program gradually spread throughout the community. Former students began volunteering to help younger participants, creating a cycle of support that grew larger every semester. Several professors contacted me with an idea that immediately captured my heart. They suggested establishing a scholarship fund for students who balanced demanding academic schedules with part-time jobs, especially those who demonstrated resilience despite limited financial resources. The proposal reminded me of every overnight library shift, every carefully planned grocery budget, and every moment when staying enrolled had depended on one more paycheck. I agreed without hesitation. Working alongside university leaders, alumni, and local business partners, we launched the Carter Opportunity Scholarship, a program designed to help hard-working students remain focused on their education instead of worrying about whether they could afford another semester. During the first scholarship ceremony, I stood beside Dr. Hannah Reynolds and Dr. Eleanor Whitmore as they introduced the inaugural recipients. Looking across the room, I saw young men and women whose stories reflected perseverance rather than privilege. Some worked early morning jobs before class. Others cared for younger siblings while pursuing demanding degrees. Their determination reminded me that extraordinary potential often grows quietly where few people are paying attention. After the ceremony, several students thanked me for believing in them. I smiled because the truth was much simpler. I believed in them because years earlier someone had chosen to believe in me. My family also continued changing in ways I never expected. Sunday dinners remained a regular tradition, but the atmosphere felt completely different from the gatherings I remembered growing up. Conversations centered on encouragement rather than comparison. My father frequently asked thoughtful questions about my engineering projects, genuinely interested in learning instead of evaluating whether they sounded impressive. My mother often called simply to ask how I was feeling or whether I had remembered to take time away from work. Tyler became one of my strongest supporters, celebrating every milestone while openly sharing his own challenges and successes without treating life like a competition. One afternoon, he surprised me by volunteering at one of our scholarship events. Watching him encourage nervous students preparing for interviews reminded me how much people could grow once they became willing to examine themselves honestly. As the scholarship program expanded, local newspapers and community organizations began highlighting its impact. Several companies offered internships to participating students, while university alumni donated additional funding to increase the number of annual awards. During one planning meeting, Dr. Whitmore smiled and quietly reminded me that meaningful leadership was measured not by personal recognition, but by the opportunities created for others. Her words perfectly reflected the lesson I had spent years learning. Success became most rewarding when it multiplied hope instead of attention. One autumn afternoon, my parents visited the university campus with me for another scholarship ceremony. As we walked beneath the same oak trees that had once witnessed my lonely lunch breaks, my mother stopped beside the familiar bench where I used to review lecture notes between classes. She looked around the quiet courtyard before softly saying that she could almost picture the younger version of me, sitting there with a backpack full of textbooks and dreams that nobody else understood. My father placed a hand on my shoulder and admitted that every visit to the campus reminded him how dangerous assumptions could become when they replaced genuine curiosity. He smiled gently before adding that he hoped every parent would learn to ask questions before reaching conclusions about their children. Later that afternoon, we watched another group of scholarship recipients receive their awards. The applause filling the auditorium sounded different from graduation day. This time, the celebration was not centered on my achievements. It belonged to young people standing at the beginning of their own journeys. As I applauded each recipient alongside my parents and Tyler, I realized that the greatest transformation had not occurred inside my career or my resume. It had happened inside our family. We had learned that encouragement carried greater power than comparison, that listening revealed more than assumptions ever could, and that quiet perseverance often produced the strongest foundations for lasting success. Looking around the auditorium filled with hopeful students, supportive families, and dedicated educators, I understood that the story which had begun with misunderstanding had grown into something far greater than personal recognition. It had become an opportunity to ensure that more young people would hear words of belief long before they ever needed to prove themselves to anyone. 5 years passed more quickly than I ever imagined. The nervous engineering student, who had once counted every dollar before buying groceries, had become a senior research engineer leading projects that improved emergency response technology across several states. Our scholarship program had grown far beyond the original vision, helping hundreds of students continue their education without sacrificing their dreams because of financial hardship. Every year I returned to the university for the scholarship ceremony and the annual leadership lecture, and every visit reminded me that the buildings themselves had never changed. What changed were the people walking through them and the confidence they carried because someone had believed in their potential. One bright spring morning, Dr. Eleanor Whitmore invited me back to campus once again, this time to deliver the keynote address at graduation. Standing backstage in the same arena where my own life had changed years earlier, I smiled as memories quietly returned. I remembered waiting behind the curtain, hearing my name announced, and realizing that years of unseen effort were finally being recognized. Now I stood in that same place for a completely different reason. The medal I had received years before no longer represented the most meaningful part of my story. The greatest honor was having the opportunity to encourage thousands of graduates who were preparing to begin lives filled with uncertainty, opportunity, and hope. Before the ceremony began, I walked through the familiar hallways with Dr. Hannah Reynolds. We laughed about old research projects, late-night laboratory sessions, and the countless cups of coffee that had fueled impossible deadlines. She smiled proudly as she pointed toward a new wing of the engineering building that now included a student collaboration center partially funded by alumni and community donations, including contributions from the Scholarship Foundation. Seeing students filling the open workspaces reminded me that every generation quietly built opportunities for the next. As the graduates entered the arena, I looked across thousands of faces filled with excitement and possibility. In the front row of the audience sat my parents and Tyler. Time had added a few gray hairs to my father and softened the expressions that had once seemed permanently serious. My mother smiled warmly as she waved when our eyes met, and Tyler gave me a confident thumbs up before taking his seat. Looking at them, I no longer saw the family that had misunderstood me. I saw people who had chosen to grow, to listen, and to rebuild relationships through humility and consistent effort. When Dr. Whitmore introduced me, she spoke not only about engineering achievements and community service, but also about the importance of resilience, kindness, and lifting others as we climb. As I stepped to the podium, the applause slowly faded, leaving the arena peacefully quiet. I looked across the graduates before beginning with a simple story about an ordinary student who once believed that success meant convincing other people to believe in him. I explained that over time, he discovered something much more important. Real confidence is built long before applause arrives. It is created every morning when we continue showing up despite doubt, disappointment, or discouragement. I encourage the graduates never to measure their worth by comparisons because every meaningful journey unfolds according to its own timeline. I reminded them that some of the strongest people they would ever meet might be carrying burdens invisible to everyone around them, and that choosing encouragement over judgment could change someone's entire future. As I finished speaking, I looked toward my parents once more. My father was smiling with unmistakable pride. My mother wiped away quiet tears just as she had years earlier, but this time those tears reflected gratitude instead of regret. Tyler applauded enthusiastically alongside them, and for the first time I realized that our family no longer needed to erase the past in order to appreciate the present. We had learned from it together. After the ceremony ended, dozens of graduates approached to thank me for the message. Several admitted they had often felt overlooked or underestimated during different seasons of their lives. I listened carefully to each story because I understood exactly how powerful a few sincere words could become. Before leaving campus, My family and I walked one final time beneath the oak trees where I had once eaten inexpensive lunches between classes. The old bench was still there, worn smooth by years of students chasing dreams that nobody else could fully see. My father stopped beside it and smiled gently. He said that whenever he visited the university now, he no longer thought about awards or honors. Instead, he thought about the importance of believing in people before the world gave them a reason to be believed. My mother quietly added that if she could give one piece of advice to every parent, it would be to notice effort as much as results, because character often grows long before success becomes visible. We stood together for a few peaceful moments before walking back toward the parking lot. As we reached our cars, I looked once more at the campus that had given me far more than an education. It had taught me that perseverance could outlast doubt, that humility could overcome pride, and that forgiveness could accomplish what resentment never could. Driving away beneath the warm afternoon sunlight, I realized the greatest recognition I had ever received was not the medal placed around my neck or the applause that echoed through the graduation arena years before. It was watching a family learn to replace assumptions with understanding, replace comparison with encouragement, and replace old mistakes with genuine love expressed through everyday actions. That became the legacy I valued most, because achievements eventually become memories, but the way we choose to believe in one another has the power to shape generations that follow.